For 8 long years, the silence had been Shah's constant companion, a suffocating blanket woven from a world devoid of sound. For 8 years, a boy touched his ear, a subtle, almost unconscious gesture that spoke volumes of unspoken discomfort. Every doctor, cloaked in the authority of their prestigious degrees and years of experience, delivered the same crushing verdict: "Nothing we can do," a hopeless refrain that echoed in the sterile halls of hospitals across the globe. His father, Oliver Hart, a titan of industry with wealth that could make nations envious, refused to surrender to despair. He poured millions into his son's plight, fueled by a love that burned brighter than any balance sheet. Private jets became ambulances in the sky, whisking Shah to the far corners of the earth, from the hallowed halls of Johns Hopkins to the cutting-edge clinics of Switzerland and the serene, technologically advanced medical centers of Tokyo. He begged specialists, men and women who commanded exorbitant fees for a single consultation, to look again, to delve deeper, to find the key that would unlock Shah's silent prison. They all shrugged, their faces etched with a professional sympathy that offered no solace. Then, in a twist of fate that could only be described as divinely orchestrated, a maid, a woman who entered Oliver's opulent world from the humblest of circumstances, noticed something no one else did. A subtle clue, a tiny detail hidden in plain sight. And what she found inside that child's ear would leave you speechless, would challenge the very foundations of medical arrogance and parental despair. Oliver Hart was a billionaire, a name whispered with reverence in the corridors of power. He possessed private jets that soared through the heavens, mansions that sprawled across acres of meticulously manicured land, more money than most people would see in 10 lifetimes, perhaps even more. Yet, all the wealth in the world couldn't buy him what he truly craved: the sound of his son's laughter. His son, Shah, was born deaf, a cruel twist of fate that had cast a long, dark shadow over Oliver's life. 8 years old, and he had never heard a single sound. The chirping of birds, the rustling of leaves, the gentle murmur of a lullaby, all were lost to him. Oliver, a man accustomed to bending the world to his will, found himself powerless against this invisible barrier. He tried everything, exhausting every avenue of medical intervention. He consulted with the best specialists money could buy, from Johns Hopkins to Switzerland and Tokyo. Specialists who charged thousands per hour. They ran tests, conducted scans with machines that hummed and whirred, performed invasive procedures that left Shah traumatized and Oliver heartbroken. All of them, without exception, delivered the same disheartening diagnosis: irreversible, congenital. Accept it. But Oliver couldn't accept it. He wouldn't, because Shah was all he had left, the sole beacon of hope in a world darkened by tragedy. His wife, Catherine, the love of his life, had died giving birth to that boy, a sacrifice that had forever etched itself into Oliver's soul. So Oliver kept searching, kept spending his fortune, kept begging God for an answer, a miracle, a glimmer of hope in the face of unwavering despair. What he didn't know, what he couldn't possibly imagine, was that the answer wasn't going to come from a gleaming hospital, a renowned specialist, or a cutting-edge medical breakthrough. It was coming from the woman he had just hired to clean his floors, a woman whose world was as far removed from his as the earth is from the stars. Victoria was a maid, a woman of simple means and unwavering determination. 27 years old, with no fancy degree hanging on her wall, no impressive credentials to boast of, just a woman trying to pay her grandmother's nursing home bills, a mountain of debt that threatened to bury her alive. But she possessed something that all the specialists lacked: a keen eye, an observant nature, and a heart filled with compassion. She noticed something about Shah that every specialist had missed, a subtle detail that had been overlooked in the relentless pursuit of complex medical explanations. Something in his ear, something dark, something that hinted at a possibility, a chance. And one evening, while Oliver was away on yet another futile quest for a cure, she made a decision, a bold and audacious choice that would either save that boy's life or destroy her own. The stakes were impossibly high, the risks were immense, but she couldn't stand idly by while Shah continued to suffer in silence. What happened next is a testament to the power of human compassion. the resilience of the human spirit, and the unwavering belief that miracles can happen in the most unexpected places. I need you to see it for yourself, to witness the unfolding of a story that will challenge your perceptions and restore your faith in the extraordinary potential of ordinary people. Before we continue, I implore you, hit subscribe, like this video, and tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching from. I believe this story found you today for a reason, that somehow, in the vast expanse of the internet, you were meant to hear this tale of hope and healing. The Hart Mansion stretched across 40 acres of prime Connecticut land, a testament to Oliver's wealth and power. From the outside, it looked like a dream, a fairy tale castle come to life. Georgian columns soared towards the sky, windows sparkled in the sunlight like 1,000 diamonds, and gardens were trimmed to perfection, a symphony of color and form. But inside, silence reigned supreme. Not the peaceful kind of silence that invites contemplation and rest, but a heavy, oppressive silence. A silence that felt like something had died and no one had bothered to bury it yet. Servants moved through the hallways like ghosts, their footsteps soft and careful, barely disturbing the stillness. They'd learned quickly that Mr. Hart liked things quiet, that any disruption, no matter how small, would be met with a cold and withering gaze. No music played in that house, no television noise filled the air, no laughter bounced off the walls, just silence, a suffocating blanket that stifled all joy and spontaneity. And somewhere in that silence, a father was drowning, consumed by grief, guilt, and a desperate longing for a son he couldn't reach. Oliver Hart sat in his study most evenings, a room filled with leather-bound books and antique furniture, staring at the family portrait above the fireplace. There she was, Catherine, his wife, her smile frozen in oil paint, her eyes still bright, still alive. Next to her, a younger version of himself, looking hopeful, looking whole, before tragedy had ripped his world apart. And between them, Shah, 3 years old in the portrait, a vibrant, happy child, before the silence had taken hold. Before Oliver understood that his son would never hear his mother's name, Catherine died the day Shah was born, a cruel irony that haunted him every waking moment. Complications, the doctors called it, a sterile term that failed to capture the devastating reality. Too much bleeding, too little time. Oliver held her hand while the light left her eyes, while the woman he loved slipped away into the darkness. She'd been trying to say something, her lips moved, but no sound came out. A final, agonizing silence that echoed the silence that would define her son's life. Just like their son, Oliver never forgave himself. If he'd chosen a different hospital, if he'd demanded better care, if he'd been paying closer attention, maybe she'd still be here. Maybe Shah would be different. The guilt sat on his chest like a stone he couldn't lift, a crushing weight that threatened to suffocate him. So he did the only thing he knew how to do. He spent money, millions of dollars, on the best specialists on Earth, on flights across oceans, on hotels that cost more per night than most people earned in a month. Every doctor said the same thing, their voices echoing in the sterile halls of hospitals around the world. Your son's deafness is congenital. There's nothing we can do. You need to accept this. Accept it. How could he accept that his boy would live in silence forever? How could he accept that Shah would never hear his father say, "I'm sorry your mother isn't here"? So Oliver kept searching, kept writing checks, kept hoping that somewhere out there, someone had the answer, the key to unlocking his son's silent world. He didn't realize that the answer wasn't going to come from a specialist, from someone with years of training and a wall full of diplomas. It was coming from someone he'd never think to look at twice. Someone who was about to walk through his front door with nothing but faith in her heart and bills she couldn't pay. Her name was Victoria, and she was about to change everything. Victoria Deer arrived on a Tuesday morning in October, a day as gray and bleak as her prospects. The sky was overcast, the kind of gray that makes everything feel heavier than it should, that leaches the color out of the world and leaves you feeling cold and empty. She stood at the gate of the Hart estate, clutching her bag with both hands, trying to steady her breathing and calm her racing heart. This was it, her last chance, the only thing standing between her and utter despair. Back in Newark, her grandmother was lying in a nursing home bed, her frail body ravaged by age and illness. The bills were piling up on Victoria's kitchen table like a tower she couldn't stop from growing, a constant reminder of her looming financial ruin. 3 months behind. That's what the letter said. The dreaded letter that had arrived in the mail like a death sentence. If she didn't pay, they'd transfer her grandmother to a state facility, the kind of place where people were forgotten, where no one held your hand, where you became a number instead of a name. Victoria couldn't let that happen. She wouldn't. Her grandmother had raised her, took her in after her parents died in a car accident when Victoria was 11, fed her when there was nothing in the fridge, prayed over her when life felt impossible. That woman deserved better than a cold room and strangers who didn't care. So Victoria took this job maid at a billionaire's mansion, swallowing her pride and setting aside her dreams. She didn't care about the fancy address, didn't care about the wealthy family, didn't care about the sprawling estate and the luxurious amenities. She just needed the paycheck, the lifeline that would keep her grandmother from being swallowed up by the system. The head housekeeper, Mrs. Patterson, met her at the door, her face as stern and unyielding as the granite facade of the mansion. Sharp eyes that missed nothing, a rigid posture that spoke of unwavering authority, the kind of woman who noticed everything and forgave nothing. "You're Victoria," she stated, her voice devoid of warmth. "Yes, ma'am," Victoria replied, her voice barely a whisper. "You'll clean. You'll stay quiet. You'll keep to yourself. Mr. Hart doesn't like disruptions, especially around his son," Mrs. Patterson instructed, her words clipped and precise. Victoria nodded. "I understand. Do you?" Because the last girl didn't. She tried to get too friendly with the boy, thought she could help. "She was gone within a week," Mrs. Patterson said, her eyes narrowing. Victoria swallowed, her throat suddenly dry. "I'm just here to work, ma'am." Mrs. Patterson studied her for a long moment, her gaze unwavering, penetrating. Then she nodded, a curt, dismissive gesture. "Good. Follow me." As they walked through the mansion, Victoria kept her eyes down, trying to avoid drawing attention to herself. But she couldn't help noticing things, the oppressive silence so thick it felt alive, the way the other servants moved without speaking, without smiling, their faces etched with a quiet resignation, the heaviness that hung in the air like fog that wouldn't lift. And then she saw him, a small boy sitting on the marble staircase, arranging toy cars in a perfect line, his movements deliberate and precise. He didn't look up, didn't acknowledge their presence, seemingly lost in his own silent world. His shoulders were hunched, his posture suggesting a deep-seated sadness. But what caught Victoria's attention was something else, something that tugged at her heart and sparked a flicker of recognition. The way he kept touching his right ear, just briefly, almost like a habit, an unconscious gesture that spoke volumes of unspoken discomfort, and the tiny wince that crossed his face each time he did, fleeting expressions of pain that seemed to go unnoticed by everyone else. Victoria's chest tightened. She'd seen that look before, that subtle sign of distress, that silent cry for help. She didn't say anything, just kept walking, following Mrs. Patterson through the labyrinthine corridors of the mansion. But her heart whispered something she couldn't ignore. Pay attention. Days passed, each one blending into the next in a monotonous cycle of cleaning floors, wiping windows, and folding linens. Victoria kept her head down, adhering strictly to Mrs. Patterson's instructions. But she couldn't stop watching Shah, her concern growing with each passing day. Every morning, she observed the same routine. The boy would sit alone in the sunroom, surrounded by model airplanes and puzzle pieces, his small hands meticulously manipulating the objects, his brow furrowed in concentration. His world was small, contained, safe, a refuge from the overwhelming silence that surrounded him. No one bothered him there. The other servants avoided him, not out of cruelty, but out of fear, as if his silence was something they might catch, a contagious affliction that would rob them of their own voices. Some whispered that the boy was cursed, that losing his mother at birth had somehow taken his hearing with her, a superstitious belief that clung to the shadows of the mansion. But Victoria saw something different. She saw a child who was desperately lonely, a boy who longed for connection, for understanding, for a way out of his silent prison. She saw him sitting by the windows, pressing his small hand against the glass, watching the world move without him, observing the vibrant tapestry of life unfolding beyond his reach. She saw the way he'd look at his father sometimes, when Oliver walked past without stopping, his face etched with a preoccupied frown, and how his little shoulders would sink just a bit lower, as if the weight of his silence had become too much to bear. She saw how he touched his ear over and over, wincing each time, and no one noticed, no one seemed to care. Or maybe they'd stopped noticing long ago, their hearts hardened by indifference or their minds blinded by the relentless pursuit of wealth and status. One afternoon, Victoria was dusting the hallway near the sunroom when she saw Shah struggling with a model airplane wing. His small fingers couldn't get the piece to fit, his frustration mounting with each failed attempt. He was on the verge of tears, his face contorted in a silent scream of despair. She shouldn't interfere, she knew that. Mrs. Patterson's warning echoed in her mind. Stay away from the boy. But before she could stop herself, before she could rationalize her actions or weigh the consequences, Victoria knelt down and gently took the wing from his trembling hand. She examined it carefully, her fingers tracing the delicate contours of the plastic. She fitted it into place with a soft click, a satisfying sound that seemed to resonate in the silent air. Shah looked up at her, his eyes wide with surprise. For a moment, they just stared at each other, two souls connecting across the chasm of silence and social class. Then something happened, something small but profound. The tiniest smile, just a flicker at the corner of his mouth, a fleeting expression of joy that illuminated his entire face. Victoria's heart cracked wide open, a wave of compassion washing over her. She smiled back, gave him a small wave, a silent gesture of friendship. He waved in return, his eyes sparkling with newfound hope. That night, Victoria lay in her bed thinking about that wave, that simple, yet powerful connection. Such a small thing, but it meant everything, a sign that she had broken through his wall of silence, that she had reached him in a way that no one else had. The next morning, she left something on the stairs where Shah always sat, a small token of her friendship. A folded paper bird, simple, yet elegant, made from scrap paper she'd found in the kitchen. She didn't wait to see if he'd take it, didn't want to risk being caught by Mrs. Patterson. But the following day the bird was gone. In its place, a note, 2 words in shaky handwriting. Thank you. Victoria pressed that note to her chest, closed her eyes, and whispered into the quiet, Lord, let me help this child. Show me how. She didn't know it yet, but God was already answering her prayer, and the answer would cost her everything she had. Over the next few weeks, something shifted in the atmosphere of the Hart mansion, a subtle change that was almost imperceptible yet undeniable. Victoria and Shah developed their own language, a secret code of gestures and expressions that transcended the barriers of speech and social status. Small things, secret things. She'd leave him candy wrapped in gold foil, hidden in unexpected places. He'd leave her drawings of airplanes, meticulously rendered in crayon on scraps of paper. She learned his signs, not the formal ones his tutors taught, but the personal ones he'd made up himself, the unique expressions that conveyed his innermost thoughts and feelings. The way he tapped his chest twice meant he was happy, a gesture of pure, unadulterated joy. The way he pointed to the sky meant he was thinking about stars, lost in the vastness of the universe. The way he pressed both palms together meant he felt safe, protected, secure. And slowly, hesitantly, he started using that last sign around her, a silent declaration of trust that warmed her heart. Safe. Victoria treasured that more than anything, that unspoken affirmation that she had created a space of security and acceptance in his silent world. But not everyone was pleased. One evening, Mrs. Patterson cornered her in the kitchen, her face a mask of disapproval. I've seen you with the boy, she said, her voice tight with restrained anger. Victoria's stomach dropped, her heart pounding in her chest. Ma'am, I don't. Mrs. Patterson's voice was sharp as glass, cutting through the air like a shard of ice. I warned you, Mr. Hart has rules. Staff doesn't get close to Shah. It's not our place. I'm not trying to cause trouble, Victoria pleaded, her voice trembling. He's just lonely. He needs a friend. That's not your concern, Mrs. Patterson retorted, stepping closer, her eyes burning with disapproval. You're here to clean, not to mother that child, not to fix what can't be fixed. You're a maid, not a miracle worker. Victoria bit her tongue, struggling to contain her anger. Fix what can't be fixed. That's what everyone said. Even here, even in this house where the boy lived, surrounded by wealth and privilege, they'd all given up, resigned themselves to his silence. If Mr. Hart finds out you've been interfering, you'll be gone. No references, no second chances. You'll be back on the streets, begging for scraps, Mrs. Patterson said, her eyes cold and unforgiving. Think about that. Think about your grandmother. Think about what you stand to lose. She walked away, her heels clicking against the floor like a countdown, each step a reminder of the ticking clock and the impending doom. That night, Victoria sat on her bed, staring at the wall, her mind racing, her heart aching. She thought about her grandmother, the bills, the paycheck she desperately needed, the fragile lifeline that kept them afloat. She thought about Shah, his lonely eyes, his pain, his silent plea for help. She thought about the dark things she'd seen in his ear, the subtle signs that hinted at a possible solution. Mrs. Patterson's words echoed in her mind. Fix what can't be fixed. But what if it could be fixed? What if everyone was wrong? What if she was the only one who saw the truth? Victoria picked up her Bible, a worn and tattered copy that had been her grandmother's, and held it close, seeking comfort and guidance. Lord, I don't know what to do, she whispered, her voice cracking with desperation. I can't lose this job, but I can't ignore what I'm seeing. I can't turn a blind eye to his suffering. She waited in the silence, listening for a sign, a whisper of guidance. But no answer came, just the weight of a decision she wasn't ready to make, the crushing responsibility of holding another person's fate in her hands. Outside her window, the moon hung low and heavy, casting long shadows across the gardens. Inside her heart, a war was beginning, a fierce battle between what she needed to survive and what she knew was right, between self-preservation and selfless compassion. She didn't know it yet, but that war was about to end, because the next morning everything would change. The events of the day would force her hand and propel her into a course of action from which there would be no turning back. The next morning came cold and quiet, the silence in the mansion even more oppressive than usual. Victoria was sweeping the hallway when she heard it. A soft thud, like something had fallen to the floor, then nothing. She stopped, listened intently, her heart pounding in her chest. Another sound, like a muffled cry, a silent scream of agony. Her heart jumped, her instincts taking over. She followed the sound to the garden door, her pace quickening with each step. And there was Shah, sitting on the stone bench, his small body hunched over, both hands pressed tight against his right ear, his face contorted in pain, tears streaming down his cheeks. But no sound came from his mouth. He was crying in complete silence, a heartbreaking spectacle of silent suffering. Victoria dropped the broom and ran to him, her feet pounding against the marble floor. She knelt in front of him, her hands shaking, her voice filled with concern. Shah, look at me, she pleaded, gently pulling his hands away from his ear. He opened his eyes, red, wet, full of pain, his gaze filled with a desperate plea for help. She gently signed your ear, her hands trembling as she formed the familiar shapes. He nodded, more tears falling, his face a mask of agony. Victoria's chest felt like it was being crushed, the weight of his suffering almost unbearable. Can I look? She signed carefully, her voice barely a whisper. I'll be gentle, promise. He hesitated, his eyes darting around nervously, fear flickering across his face. He'd been poked and prodded by doctors his whole life, subjected to countless tests and procedures, all of which had yielded nothing but pain and disappointment. But then he leaned forward, his trust outweighing his fear. Trust, he signed, his small hands forming the word with hesitant precision. This child, who had been subjected to a lifetime of medical interventions, who had every reason to be wary of adults, trusted her. A simple maid with no medical training and nothing but compassion in her heart. Victoria swallowed hard, her throat tight with emotion. She tilted his head gently toward the morning light and looked, her heart pounding in her chest. There it was, deep inside his ear canal, the object of her growing concern. Something dark, dense, glistening like wet stone. A grotesque mass that seemed to be blocking all sound. Her breath stopped, her mind reeling. It was bigger than before, clearer, more menacing. How had every doctor missed this? How had every scan overlooked it? How could they have dismissed his pain and suffering for so long? Victoria's mind raced back to Marcus, her cousin, who had been deaf for 6 years due to a similar blockage. The doctors had written him off, told his parents there was nothing they could do. But then, a determined specialist had taken a closer look and discovered the problem. A simple procedure had changed his life, unlocking a world of sound he never knew existed. Her hands trembled, her mind flooded with a sense of urgency. "Shah," she signed slowly, carefully choosing her words. "There's something in your ear, something that shouldn't be there." His eyes went wide, his face paling with fear. "We need to tell your father," she signed, her voice barely audible. Panic exploded across his face, his hands moving fast, frantic. "No, no doctors, please," he signed, his voice a silent plea. "They hurt me, always hurt, never help." Victoria's heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. She understood. 8 years of specialists, 8 years of procedures, 8 years of pain with no relief. He'd learned that help meant suffering, that doctors were instruments of torture, not agents of healing. She took his small hands in hers, looked into his eyes, her voice filled with sincerity. "I would never hurt you," she whispered, her gaze unwavering. "Never." He stared at her, his eyes searching hers, trying to discern her true intentions. And slowly, imperceptibly, his breathing calmed, the frantic energy draining from his body. But the fear didn't leave his eyes, the memory of past traumas still lingering in his gaze. Victoria sat with him until the tears dried, until his hands stopped shaking, until the storm of emotions had subsided. Then she walked back inside, her mind spinning, her heart pounding, her conscience warring with her fears. She knew what she'd seen, she was certain of it. She knew what it meant, the possibility of restoring his hearing, of unlocking his silent world. But what could she do? Tell Oliver? He'd call more specialists, the same ones who'd missed it for years, subjecting Shah to more tests and procedures. Do nothing? Watch this child suffer in silence, knowing that she could potentially help him? That night, Victoria didn't sleep. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the images of Shah's pain and the dark mass in his ear haunting her. Her grandmother's voice echoing in her head, a comforting whisper from the past. God doesn't always send help in fancy packages, baby girl. Sometimes he sends it through folks with nothing but willing hands. Victoria closed her eyes, her mind flooded with memories of her grandmother's unwavering faith and boundless generosity. Her hands were willing, she knew that. But was she brave enough to use them? Was she willing to risk everything for this child? 3 days passed, each one an eternity. Victoria couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, could barely think. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw it. That dark mass lodged deep in Shah's ear, blocking everything. And Shah's face, the pain, the silent tears, the desperate longing for connection. On the 3rd night, she sat on the edge of her bed, Bible open in her lap, her fingers tracing the worn pages. But the words blurred, failing to offer the comfort she sought. All she could see was Marcus, her cousin, deaf for 6 years, written off by every doctor, until someone finally looked, someone finally cared. One procedure, one moment of attention, and his world exploded into sound. Victoria's hands wouldn't stop shaking, her body trembling with indecision. She knew what she'd seen in Shah's ear. She was convinced of it. But who was she? A maid. No degree, no training, no right to touch that boy. If she was wrong, if she hurt him, she'd go to prison, her life ruined forever. If she was right, but Oliver found out she'd acted without permission, she'd lose everything. Her job, her income, her grandmother's care. "Lord," she whispered, her voice cracking with fear and desperation. "What do you want from me? Show me the way." Silence, just the ticking of the clock, a constant reminder of the passage of time and the urgency of her decision. She thought about her brother, Daniel, dead at 14, lost to a disease they couldn't afford to treat. He'd been sick for months, complaining of pain, but they couldn't afford doctors, couldn't afford help. Victoria watched him fade, watched him struggle to breathe, watched him try to speak words that wouldn't come. He died in her arms, silent, just like Shah's world. His last breath a silent whisper lost to the wind. She'd promised herself that day, promised God that never again would she stand by while a child suffered. Never again would she let poverty and circumstance dictate a child's fate. But this was different, this was more complicated. This wasn't her brother. This was a billionaire's son. A child surrounded by wealth and privilege. And she was nobody. A maid with nothing to offer but her willing hands and her unwavering faith. Victoria closed the Bible, stood up, and walked to the window. The moon hung heavy outside, spilling silver light across the gardens, transforming the familiar landscape into a dreamlike realm. Somewhere in this mansion, a little boy was sleeping with pain in his ear and silence in his world. And she was the only one who'd noticed, the only one who'd seen. "God," she breathed, her voice barely audible. "I'm scared. I'm so scared. But if this is what you're asking." Her voice trailed off, her mind flooded with conflicting emotions. She thought of her grandmother's words. "The Lord doesn't call the equipped, child. He equips the called." Victoria wiped her eyes, took a deep breath, and made a decision. Tomorrow, if Shah showed pain again, she would act. She would trust what God had shown her, even if it cost her everything. She climbed into bed, her heart pounding in her chest, her mind racing with possibilities and fears. Sleep wouldn't come, but peace did. A strange, heavy peace. The kind that comes when you've decided to step off the cliff and trust that God will catch you. Tomorrow was coming, and with it, the moment that would change everything, the moment that would determine not only Shah's fate, but her own as well. The next evening came too quickly, each minute ticking by like a hammer blow. Oliver was away on business, as usual, his absence a constant reminder of his inability to connect with his son on a deeper level. The house was quiet, the silence more oppressive than ever. Victoria was folding linens in the hallway when she heard it. A thump, a sickening sound that made her blood run cold. Her heart stopped, her breath catching in her throat. She ran toward the sound, her feet flying across the marble floor. Shah lay on the hallway floor, curled up in a fetal position, both hands pressed to his ear, his face contorted in agony. Tears streamed down his cheeks, silent tears that spoke volumes of unspoken pain. Victoria dropped to her knees beside him, her hands trembling, her voice filled with compassion. "I'm here, baby. I'm here," she whispered, gently stroking his hair. She cradled his head gently, tilting it toward the lamplight. The dark mass was clearly visible now, swollen, pressing against his ear canal, a grotesque obstruction that seemed to be suffocating him. Her hands trembled, her mind racing. This was it, the moment of truth, the culmination of days of agonizing deliberation. She reached into her pocket, pulled out the sterilized tweezers she'd taken from the first aid kit 3 days ago, just in case, a secret weapon she'd prepared for this very moment. Her breath came in short bursts, her body trembling with a mixture of fear and determination. "Lord," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Guide my hands, please. Give me strength and wisdom." Shah looked up at her, his eyes wide, scared but trusting. His gaze filled with a silent plea for help. "I won't hurt you," she signed with one hand, her voice a reassuring whisper. "I promise." He nodded slowly, his trust a heavy burden on her shoulders. Victoria steadied herself, took a deep breath, and gently, carefully moved the tweezers into his ear canal, her movements precise and deliberate. Her hand shook, her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel it, the dark mass, dense and sticky, resisting her efforts. She hooked it gently, pulled, her muscles straining with the effort. Resistance. Her heart hammered. Her mind flooded with doubt. She pulled again, slow, careful, her every move guided by prayer and intuition. And then, release, a sudden yielding that sent a jolt of adrenaline through her veins. Something slid free, emerging from the darkness of his ear canal and landing in her palm. Dark, wet, biological, years of buildup that had stolen his hearing, a grotesque artifact of neglect and medical indifference. Victoria stared at it, her stomach turning, her mind struggling to comprehend the enormity of what she had done. But before she could react, before she could process the moment, Shah gasped, a sound so unexpected, so profound, it sent shivers down her spine. A real gasp, audible, loud. A sound that shattered the silence and filled the hallway with a sense of wonder. His hand flew to his ear. His eyes went wide, wider than she'd ever seen them. His face a mixture of disbelief and awe. He sat up suddenly, looking around the hallway like he'd never seen it before, his senses overwhelmed by the sudden influx of sound. Then he pointed at the grandfather clock on the wall, the one that had been ticking his whole life, the one he'd never heard, the one that had always been a silent sentinel in his world. His mouth opened, his lips trembling. A sound came out, rough, broken, unpracticed, but real. A sound that resonated with the power of 1,000 unspoken words. Tick, he whispered, his voice barely audible, yet filled with a profound sense of wonder. Victoria's tears fell. Victoria had observed the father's agonizing journey, witnessing how he had been consumed by his son's problem, seemingly forgetting the boy himself in the process. She lifted her gaze to meet Oliver's. "But you did see him," Oliver said, his voice thick with emotion. "You saw his pain, the hidden depths of his suffering. You paid attention, offered solace when everyone else, myself included, was too preoccupied to notice." Victoria's own tears began to stream down her face, a mixture of relief and profound empathy. "I just loved him, sir. That's all there was to it." Oliver shook his head slowly, a gesture of disbelief and overwhelming gratitude. "No, Victoria, that's everything. That's the crux of it all." He stood, the weight of the past years etched in his movements. "I've spent 8 years desperately trying to buy a miracle, throwing money at the problem, chasing every false hope. And God, in his infinite wisdom, sent one to me through the most unexpected source, the kind, observant woman I hired to clean my floors." Victoria wiped her eyes, a gentle smile gracing her lips. "God uses the willing, Mr. Hart. That's what my grandmother always told me. He works through those who open their hearts." Oliver nodded, a profound sense of understanding washing over him. "She was right. Your grandmother was absolutely right." Together, they walked back towards Sean's sterile, white hospital room, the air thick with unspoken hope. Inside, the boy sat on the edge of the bed, headphones clamped over his ears. A symphony of sound filled his world for the first time, his face illuminated with pure, unadulterated wonder. The transformation was palpable, a stark contrast to the withdrawn child they had both come to know. When Sean saw them enter, his eyes widened, and he ripped off the headphones, a bright, genuine smile spreading across his face. He launched himself from the bed and ran straight to Victoria, wrapping his small arms tightly around her waist. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice rough and untrained, yet achingly beautiful. Victoria knelt down, returning his embrace with fierce tenderness. "You were always worth hearing, baby. Always." She held him close, conveying a love that transcended words. Shah pulled back slightly, his gaze shifting to his father, a newfound connection sparking between them. "Dad, I can hear your heart. It's beating fast." Oliver dropped to his knees, overwhelmed by the moment, and pulled his son into a tight embrace. For the first time in 8 long, agonizing years, Sean heard his father cry, the sound a release of years of pent-up grief and despair. Victoria, standing quietly beside them, finally allowed herself to breathe deeply, a wave of peace washing over her. God had answered her prayer, not with a quick fix or a miraculous cure funded by money, but with something far more profound. Willing hands, a faithful heart, and the unwavering power of love. Sometimes she thought that's all a miracle truly needs, the courage to care and the willingness to act.